The entire auditorium buzzed with laughter, proud applause, and the clatter of camera shutters, but in the middle of that roaring celebration, a single young woman sat still, silent, and heartbreakingly alone. Her name was Aria Whitford, the daughter of one of the richest and most powerful CEOs in the city, but none of that mattered at her graduation ceremony. While every other student drowned beneath warm hugs, congratulatory cheers, and the recognition of family, Aria remained isolated in her seat, clutching her diploma with trembling hands, forcing a smile nobody bothered to notice. Because Aria could not hear the world celebrating her, and the world, in return, barely noticed her existence. If you believe kindness and second chances can change a life, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps spread these powerful stories of humanity. Aria had always lived inside a strange contrast, surrounded by privilege yet starved of connection. Her father, Victor Whitford, was the kind of man whose footsteps made boardrooms fall silent. He built an empire through sheer authority, precision, and ruthlessness, but when it came to his only daughter, life had dealt him a challenge he could never fully control. Aria had lost her hearing at age 5 after a sudden viral infection, and though Victor poured money into treatments, research, and specialists around the world, nothing restored her hearing. Somewhere in that process, he convinced himself that responsibility for her condition meant responsibility for solving it, and when he couldn't, he slowly drifted away from the emotional closeness she needed most. Growing up, Aria learned to read lips, use sign language, and navigate a world designed for ears. She learned to excel academically and express herself through writing and art. But what she could never fully learn was how to blend into a world that saw her silence as distance, her quietness as aloofness, her inability to hear as a lack of desire to connect. People admired her last name but rarely tried to understand the girl behind it. Even in college, her classmates treated her with a polite respect that kept her separated, as if she existed within an invisible bubble nobody dared to touch. Some were intimidated by her father's reputation, others simply lacked patience or understanding. But today, her graduation day, she had hoped things would feel different. She had imagined sitting among friends, sharing smiles, exchanging notes to make up for the lack of words, taking photos together, maybe even celebrating late into the evening with music she couldn't hear but dancing she could still feel. Yet one by one, her classmates disappeared into the arms of parents, siblings, cousins, lovers, and friends. They waved to her kindly from afar, but nobody approached. Nobody sat beside her. Nobody asked how she felt. And her father? He wasn't there, though she kept glancing toward the doors with a fragile hope she couldn't let go of. His assistant had sent a message earlier that morning. He had an urgent investor meeting, one that he couldn't afford to miss. Aria had nodded numbly at the text, as if disappointment were something she had long grown accustomed to swallowing without reaction. So she sat, her cap slightly crooked, the edges of her gown pressed beneath trembling fingers, as loneliness curled around her like a shadow. The applause of proud families thundered through the hall, meaningless vibrations she could only feel through the floor beneath her feet. The principal's speech faded out as she blinked back, the sting forming in her eyes. She tried to smile for herself, to remind herself that she had worked hard, that she deserved to celebrate even if nobody celebrated with her. But the moment felt hollow, fragile, like her heart had been wrapped in glass that might shatter if she breathed too deeply. Across the room, hidden among the sea of proud families, stood a man named Evan Brooks, a single father who had spent the past 4 years juggling 2 jobs and raising his own daughter, Lily, who was graduating today as well. Unlike most families cheering loudly, Evan remained quiet, holding a small camera and a bouquet of flowers as he watched his daughter from a respectful distance. He didn't want to embarrass her with loud cheering, though pride was practically radiating from his face. As everyone dispersed into clusters of affectionate celebration, Evan scanned the hall for Lily, ready to call out to her, until he noticed Aria. A young woman alone, stiff, still, her shoulders curved inward as if she were trying to make herself smaller. Evan didn't know her name or her story, but he had seen her in passing during school events. What he had noticed, what few people ever did, was the way she communicated with interpreters or how she looked at lips carefully when someone spoke. He remembered the way she had smiled shyly at classmates who rarely returned the warmth. He remembered how her eyes always seemed hopeful even when her environment wasn't. And then he remembered something else, something newer, more personal. 2 years ago, Lily had dated a boy who was deaf, and Evan had taken it upon himself to learn sign language so he could communicate with him respectfully. Though that relationship had ended, the skill remained, gently shelved in Evan's memory, waiting for a moment that mattered. That moment seemed to be now. He watched Arya clutch her diploma a little tighter, blink a little faster, and stare at the exit as if hoping someone, anyone, would walk through the door and call her name in the language she could understand. Something inside Evan tightened. This wasn't just loneliness, this was a familiar ache. He had been alone many times as a young parent, alone in emergency rooms, alone during school meetings, alone facing bills he didn't know how to pay. He recognized the look of someone pretending they didn't mind the emptiness. So he stepped away from the crowd. Slowly, gently, and without drawing attention, he approached her row. She didn't notice him at first until he moved close enough for her to sense motion in her peripheral vision. She looked up, startled, wiping at her eyes quickly, embarrassed to be seen in a vulnerable moment. Evan smiled, soft, warm, patient. Not pitying. Just present. Then, without saying a word, he lifted his hands and began signing, "Are you okay?" The transformation in her expression was immediate and breathtaking. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, her shoulders straightened as if she had suddenly inhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It wasn't just the content of the message, it was the miracle of being spoken to. Being acknowledged. Being reached. She responded hesitantly at first, signing back with a tremor in her fingers, "You know sign language." He nodded and replied that he wasn't perfect at it, but he learned it for someone who once mattered. He signed that he noticed she was alone, and he didn't want her to feel invisible on such an important day. Arya's chest tightened. In that single moment, the noise around her faded, not because she couldn't hear it, but because she didn't need it anymore. Someone had finally stepped into her silence with understanding, not charity. As they continued signing, Lily joined them, surprised to find her father communicating fluently with the quiet girl she had seen around campus but never really spoken to. When Evan explained the situation, Lily felt a pang of empathy and signed her congratulations to Arya. For the first time all day, Arya's smile reached her eyes, gentle, glowing, real. Wordlessly, Lily invited Arya to take photos with them. Arya hesitated, unsure if she belonged, but Lily slid her arm through hers and pulled her into a warm, friendly embrace. It was so effortless, so natural, that Arya felt tears prick her eyes again, only this time, they weren't from loneliness but relief. Evan handed her a flower from Lily's bouquet, signing that this day deserved to be remembered with joy, not sorrow. Arya held the flower like a fragile treasure, realizing that a stranger had just offered her more warmth and presence than her own father ever had. The thought ached, but it also opened something inside her, something hopeful. Later, as crowds thinned and families headed to celebratory dinners, Evan asked Arya, through sign, if she had plans. She shook her head shyly. He invited her to join him and Lily for a small dinner at a cozy diner nearby. Arya was hesitant, unsure if she was imposing, but the sincerity in both their faces convinced her to accept. At the diner, Evan and Lily made sure the conversation was comfortable for her, signing slowly, writing when needed, making eye contact, making space for silence. Arya felt more included in those 2 hours than in 4 years of college. For the first time, she wasn't struggling to belong, she simply did. When Evan dropped her off outside her home later that evening, she thanked him with tears glimmering in her eyes. He signed gently that kindness doesn't need recognition, it just needs a chance to exist. She watched their car drive away long after it disappeared, clutching the flower he'd given her. Inside her massive, dimly lit home, Victor was on the phone, pacing, giving orders to some executive across the ocean. He didn't look up when she entered. He didn't notice the tear-stained cheeks or the bouquet stem in her hand. He didn't notice that his daughter had experienced something life-changing today. Or maybe he noticed, but chose not to look.